right, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of the Teardown. My name is Jeff Gluck, along with Jordan Bianchi. Day 5, end of week 1 of NASCAR. And boy, today is a doozy. Buckle up. I hope you're all warmer than we were today. It's a chilly one here in Charlotte, North Carolina. But we've made it to the end of the first week of this trial that is still hard to believe it's actually even happening, Jordan. But here we are.
Surreal. This whole week has been surreal. And then today, we kind of had an idea that Michael Jordan was going to testify, though some scheduling things we weren't 100% certain. Then we knew for sure this morning. And then it was, wow, this is Michael Jordan is testifying in a federal case against NASCAR, and we're covering it, and we're here. It blows your mind.
It was very surreal for sure. But before we get to Michael Jordan's testimony, and of course we'll tell you all about that, we have 2 other witnesses with plenty of information to pass along to you, and we want to make sure that we cover all these.
3, really, if you figure OD's on that mix too.
Well, I'm saying before Michael.
Oh, before Michael
Jordan.
Jordan.
Yeah. We have 4 witnesses today.
4. We're making progress.
Judge Bell said yesterday we need to speed things up, and the sides listen to him. In fact, one thing that before the trial started today, Judge Bell addressed the attorneys on both sides. And he said that, there's certain things that happened, and we need to stop disputing those things happened. The question for the jury is why they happened and how did it affect the relevant market, which the relevant market is premier stock car racing. So again, it's not all motorsports and it's not just NASCAR, it's premier stock car racing. So on that note, Judge Bell tells everybody, I don't really want to hear about you guys, quote, growing the sport anymore. Because there's a lot of talk, especially from Steve O'Donnell, growing the sport. NASCAR asking questions about, did this grow the sport? Judge Bell says growing the sport is another way of saying increasing revenues in NASCAR, okay? And he says increasing revenues of NASCAR is not a justification for having anti-competitive practices. It's not relevant to this claim. Part of the jury instructions are going to be, and there's a long list of them, it was hard to write down this part, but part of it is you cannot argue that monopolistic practices would better promote that industry. So when it's growing the sport, he says it needs to be relevant, it needs to be for the relevant market. So growing all of premier stock car racing, essentially, not just for the good of NASCAR. So that was kind of interesting.
It was interesting. And then he had a little quip to the lawyers saying, I can think of a fruitful way for you to spend your weekend, which to me was interpreted as get in a room, figure this out, let's settle this darn thing, and let's all go home.
Oh, really? Is that what you took?
That's how I took it. Did you not?
I was thinking that he was threatening to say, I can think of a fruitful weekend, you spending your time here in court to knock this out.
Oh, I don't think you do that because of the jury.
Yeah.
I don't think I took that as he's been
settle this. Okay, that makes sense.
Throughout, he's been imploring these teams to settle, and after a week of this, let's figure this out. That's my interpretation.
Yeah, well, and the reason that came up, I can think of a fruitful way for you to spend the weekend, is because both sides agreed that they will spend the weekend coming to agreement on something small but probably important. NASCAR wants the jury to know, this has not come up yet, okay? NASCAR wants the jury to know that the teams raced this year, right? Because the jury doesn't know anything about NASCAR, and the jury has been told that these charters expired, right? So they heard these charters expired at the end of 2024 when the teams didn't sign them. Nobody has said that the teams raced this year, but there's a reason. The reason is nobody wants to touch the fact that there was a preliminary injunction in this case that allowed them to race for charter status for part of the year until an appeals court overturned that. Remember that Richmond appeals court overturned it, overturned Judge Bell's decision, and then they lost their charter status for good. So I think that's like a third rail type thing where they don't want that to come up as part of the proceedings. The teams say it's unfair for NASCAR to say, hey, these guys race this year, because then it's disproving their claim that it's hard that, this is not financially viable to do that. If they say, well, they raced this year, they didn't have charters, so The jury's like, what are they? What is this about? So the sides are going to try to agree on wording to give to Judge Bell that he can read to the jury, where he's like, yeah, okay, so by mutual agreement, circumstances you don't need to know about, it's not relevant. The parties that they race this year. That's all we're going to tell you, but they race this year, that kind of thing. Or they're going to agree on the wording. So that's when he said, I can think of another fruitful way for you to spend your weekend. But like Jordan said, and then we'll have Shannon McMenemy on, our attorney friend, later. That's probably what he meant. Okay, so where we left off yesterday, Steve O'Donnell, Jordan, he is still under cross-examination, which again is the NASCAR attorney who's doing this. So I've highlighted some interesting stuff here. NASCAR sent letters when SRX started, and now remember, there's an exclusivity provision, right? NASCAR team owners are not allowed to participate in other ownership of other series or run other series and stuff, right? So SRX starts in 2020.
2021.
And this letter is from 2020.
Okay, sorry.
So it's starting up, right? Apparently. And so NASCAR sends letters to Tony asking about what are you doing here? Brett Frood sends his letter back July 21.
He's the president of Stewart-Haas Racing.
Thank you. Saying we're not going to be a direct competitor. This was supposed to be ancillary racing competition, something that Steve O'Donnell viewed as, hey, that's great. We love all forms of racing. We want everybody to be racing, not stock cars, though.
High tide raises all ships is what his belief is.
Mm-hmm. So based on this letter, he wasn't concerned. However, Jordan, Sam Flood, you guys know who Sam Flood is? NBC Sports.
Head of NBC Sports. One of the head big decision makers at Sam Flood, or NBC Sports.
Yes. He calls Steve O'Donnell.
Mm-hmm.
He says, Steve O'Donnell, I see this SRX series. What are we paying for?
Mm-hmm.
If someone can have the look and feel of NASCAR, why am I paying what I'm paying?
Mm-hmm.
Well, imagine being Steve O'Donnell and hearing this. You're trying to enter a media rights negotiation deal, and one of your biggest partners, NBC Sports, is telling you, you want me to pay all this money in this deal coming up. Why am I paying this if SRX can just go rip off this looks just like NASCAR in some ways.
And it's a lot cheaper for us. We can get all these star drivers. We want this.
Right. So that was interesting. And we'll come back to SRX, of course, later. Another thing I highlighted that I thought was interesting was Steve O'Donnell was asked, what would you do if you were going to form a new competitor stock car racing series to NASCAR? What would you do? Right. So he says, well, I'd make the cars as economical, as safe as possible. I'd consider whether we need race teams or not. Maybe we go direct to drivers. He says, I'd look at all of North America. So I'd go to Mexico and Canada too.
International even.
But this drew a snicker, right, from the 2311 side of the room. I couldn't tell if it was Bob Jenkins or Denny Hamlin or somebody over there, because they asked Steve O'Donnell, do you think a competitor series would want to use the same tracks as NASCAR? And he said no. So I don't know that was well received on the other side of the room based on the reaction I heard.
No.
Which understandable. I think a competitor series to NASCAR would want to use.
Of course, they would. I mean, who
tracks.
wouldn't want to race at a Charlotte Motor Speedway or even a Daytona? I mean, pick any. They're beautiful. A lot of them are nice. They got all the amenities. Absolutely. Instead of the alternatives that are out there.
Right.
And we have alternatives, by the way, because he goes through them.
Yeah. So he says, well, there's other tracks they could go to. Here's his idea. A combination of ovals, road courses, street courses. They could go to South Boston, Hickory, Langley, Pikes Peak, Kern County, the Kevin Harvick track, Barber Motorsports Park near Talladega, Road America, do a street course and partner with IndyCar. Like he said, call up
the Arlington Grand Prix and get on that, which is going to be a new IndyCar race next year right outside the Dallas Cowboys Stadium.
Exactly.
And then he mentions the 2 Formula One races in the United States and said, hey, I would like to be maybe a companion event with those in Miami or in Las Vegas. And yes, I'm sorry, there's 3 races, Formula One races, but he mentioned specifically Las Vegas and Miami.
Yeah, he was saying if I was going to do a new series, I would do like a doubleheader with those, call up and see if I can run the Vegas Grand Prix as a support series type thing.
Can I run the night before?
So he's asked again about the goodwill provision, and he says, from his view, if we guarantee entry and money, if we're giving you these charters, we're guaranteeing you entry into the race. We have a right to put this goodwill provision into our agreements because we're asking you not to compete against us. We are all in it together. We're all in. By the way, side note here, Jordan. This was just a little side thing that was slipped in, and I wonder if you know anything about this.
Is this what you're talking about?
The Liberty part?
Yeah, the Liberty Media part.
Steve O'Donnell says under oath that NASCAR has had conversations with Liberty Media, the owner of F1, about the charter model and how they, Liberty Media, could be involved. What does that mean?
I don't know. They didn't expand upon it.
Did that catch you by surprise?
I mean, it wouldn't surprise me that you'd at least have a conversation about, you want to talk, right? You never know. What they talked about is what I'm curious about. I'm not surprised they talked. They should talk. But what they talked about is the most interesting thing. We don't know that. Let's figure that out.
So Steve O'Donnell goes on to say that he's sort of singing the praises here of the benefits that NASCAR provides, including free Sunoco fuel. They get free race fuel. And he says the Goodyear tire pricing is discounted. So we've heard that Goodyear tires cost a lot for the teams throughout this trial and stuff. And just in general, we hear that tires cost a lot, right? Sets of tires. But he says compared to other high-level racing, quote, NASCAR offers the cheapest price of tires. And he also says, there was this disputed the 7-7 agreement, right? Like, so this current charter deal, Jordan, it was the first 7 years, and we'll hear more about this later, and then 7 more years.
There's a 7-year option tacked on to the first 7 years.
NASCAR put a floor in, so the teams can't get paid any less
money
than they're currently getting paid. But there's no guarantee that they would get any more.
But there is guarantee, if I have it right, the minimum for the next deal would be the maximum for how this deal would end.
But there's no guarantee that they have to give more. But he says that, quote, there would absolutely give more.
I thought there was things built in if they said if the contract actually went up, there was things built in, but I may be misspeaking.
So they said this later. If the next TV deal goes down, this is off the table.
Okay. Yep.
So there's actually no floor guarantee if the TV deal goes down, which, by the way, I think it might be expected to possibly go down next time. This might be the high watermark, possibly. We don't know.
You don't know. I mean, TV rights right now across the board for sports leagues are rising. So who knows? I mean, projecting and what's going to happen in 2031 is fool's gold.
Steve O'Donnell, Jordan, he said this yesterday too. We didn't mention it on the show. He's not in favor of permanent charters himself. So even though there was talk about how he had gone, he's a team guy, gone on behalf of teams, he says he's not in favor of permanent charters. And the reason is, quote, there are a lot of unknowns. It's different than other sports. We don't know our broadcast revenue schedule. We needed flexibility. And so he doesn't think that that's practical because there's too many things that NASCAR could do in the future. You don't know what kind of cars you're going to run. You don't know what the schedule is going to be. You don't know what the TV rights are going to be. So they can't give permanent charters because of that reason.
And the other thing that quickly, we're talking about tracks here as well. Another thing that OD talked about was it was brought up on how, if you have an exclusivity agreement, you can't race. You can only race 1 or 2 NASCAR races and that's it. And they made it a point to say that's not true. There are many other tracks that have NASCAR races that hold other events, whether it's IndyCar or IMSA or whatnot. And there's also other events going on at these places as well. They made it a point to mention that Bristol Motor Speedway hosted a Major League Baseball game this year. Many tracks host concerts, other races, car shows, etc. And because it's Christmas season, some of these tracks are even doing light shows.
We get to a part of the negotiations now, and we didn't really hear anything more about this. We might hear it, I guess, when Curtis Polk comes up.
That's going to be fun.
So Curtis Polk, Steve O'Donnell says, did not come in with an appreciation for NASCAR. He reminded everyone he's a businessman and he could leave at any time. Apparently, at a board meeting in 2024, according to Steve O'Donnell, Curtis Polk, co-owner of 2311, Michael Jordan's longtime financial advisor,
business partner,
quote, yelled at me personally, threatened to kick me out of my own meeting. I knew he wasn't coming from a place of respect. Later, he talks about this meeting again. I don't have it right here because it's on a later page, but I think he says in all of his 30 years,
he's never been talked to like that, basically.
Yeah. His
never been
entire time with
disrespected.
NASCAR.
Yep.
He's never been treated that way.
Yep.
We learned, Jordan, today more about the potential cost cap. We've heard that this cost cap was floated, right? Now, it didn't come into being because the big three teams objected to this. They said it's not practical for them, apparently. But what was the cost cap going to be? We found out today. It was going to be between $16 and $18 million. And that's interesting because the teams are saying they spent an average of $20 million. We heard yesterday that Front Row Motorsports spends more closer to an average of $14 million. And they're getting paid, an average of $12.5 million per car.
Correct.
From the new deal.
Correct.
So they wanted to reduce the cost, not all the way to cover everything, but teams would have had to cut costs if it was going to be 16 to 18 million. Teams would have had to cut a lot. So, and why didn't all teams want it? Steve O'Donnell says, excuse me, quote, go ahead.
Go ahead. I was trying to help you out here because you're coughing.
If you were dominating, some people may not be enthused about that. It didn't get the greatest reaction from the big three. However, the mid to lower teams all liked the idea. So it sounds like Penske, Gibbs, and Hendrick were able to exert enough power here to torpedo the idea of a cost cap, at least for now in NASCAR.
The one thing that I think is interesting, though, he talked about a floor for the cost cap. Cost floor. So obviously the teams can only spend up to $14 million. They wanted to put in a cost floor at, I think,
$10 million.
$10 million.
So a minimum spend that you're required.
And what they wanted to do, and they used this example, they didn't want a low-end team to become like the Miami Marlins, where they're just collecting checks and they're not really trying to be competitive. And this was something that a few of the smaller teams, I think he actually said two, objected to, because they were actually below that limit of 10 million, and they would have to increase their spending to go to that number. And so there was three big teams and there was two smaller teams that were against a cost cap.
So very interesting there that a couple teams don't even spend $10 million a year when the average are perhaps spending over 20, or 20, right? So now we move on to Jeffrey Kessler is doing the redirect examination here, end of the cross examination. And we told you yesterday that Jeffrey Kessler and Steve O'Donnell had this moment.
This was great.
Right? Where Jeffrey Kessler raised his voice, said, May 2022, we're talking about whatever, right? The meeting. Or May 2024, whatever it was. And Steve O'Donnell said, I can hear you, right? And it shifted the dynamic a little bit, right? Because it was like, man, Jeffrey Kessler's being the angry one. So Jeffrey Kessler opens today.
Literally, first thing he says.
He says, some people say I get a little excited. As you can tell, I'm a New Yorker, right? And he says, I want to apologize for that. I tend to get a little emotional about things, and I'll try not to do that. That's just a very calm voice. And Steve O'Donnell says, I'm an emotional guy, all good. So that's the tone setter. But then almost immediately, he didn't go full bombastic, but
he walked in that direction.
Yeah, because he couldn't believe that Steve O'Donnell, he seemed to have some information that Homestead, they're negotiating, I guess, to get $5 million, to try to get $5 million from the city for the championship race.
Athletic maybe previously reported that, but yes.
Yes, but so Steve O'Donnell, though, at first did not acknowledge that. He said that they get a little bit of money from Avondale and Winston-Salem. And then Jeffrey Kessler said, did you get $9 million from Winston-Salem? And Steve O'Donnell said, I don't know. And then he didn't follow up on it. But it sounded like he had information that he did. So we talk about money splits as a point that Jeffrey Kessler wants to make. NASCAR, Jordan, says they get, quote, a little less than $100 million a year in sponsorship.
Official sponsors.
Official sponsors of NASCAR. Official sponsor of this. This is the official almond of NASCAR. This is the official whatever, you get it.
Squeaky toy.
And of course, I'm sure that includes their premier partners and all that stuff, right? So they get a little less than $100 million a year. And Jeffrey Kessler emphasizes there's none of that money goes to the teams. There's no money to teams from the other revenue. None of the entry fees, social media, all that stuff go to the teams. And in fact, he says the teams get 45% of the media revenue, but the overall revenue is less than 45%. NASCAR's over. So NASCAR's saying, we're giving you guys 45%, almost half. The teams are saying, well, you're giving us almost half of the media rights deal, but you're not giving us almost half of everything that NASCAR brings in.
And that is a really big thing that we're going to talk about this more later. And that's something to really know when we're hearing this. There's the media rights deal, which the teams are getting that percentage from, but they are not getting percentage from the overall revenue. Every dollar that NASCAR makes, the teams aren't necessarily getting a piece of that. And that is a point of contention with the teams. And it's something they wanted to fix going into this. They were seeking a third of that revenue.
So cleaning up a couple of things here, Jordan, from yesterday that we already told you. Now we need to go back because under redirect examination, we get some slightly different information. I told you yesterday that the teams were actually happy with the 25% revenue in the 2016 charter deal. The original charter deal, they had always been getting 25% of the TV money since 2001. And we had read some report, or the RTA original report, that the teams didn't seek any changes to this. So Jeffrey Kessler says, you didn't mean to suggest yesterday that the teams were happy with that, right? And he says, well, the teams certainly always wanted more money, but that the medallions, the charters were the focus. But he acknowledges now that the teams did want more money than the 25%. So it wasn't like they didn't want it at all, I guess, right? Another thing we're cleaning up. Actually, this isn't cleaning up, but this was an interesting nugget.
Yeah,
Amazon Chicago.
Yeah, and I think it's a little bit of semantics. Like I understand what.
Yeah.
Okay, why don't you explain, then we can.
Well, he was trying to. He was no. You're fine. You're fine. I don't mean to. I'm agreeing with you that he started out by trying to get OD on saying, okay, you didn't mean to represent yesterday that the only reason you got Amazon was because of Chicago street race, right? He's like, no, I absolutely did. They said that they came to, he said, well, are they leaving because they didn't even have the street race? It's TNT.
Yeah, he made it a whole big thing of who carried the Chicago street race this year? TNT.
Yeah. But here's the thing that I wrote down and highlighted, because it emerges as part of this, you guys. There's something in Amazon's contract with NASCAR that says they will have a street race. I believe it makes it seem like every year.
I thought they said new event.
No, a street race. Specifically, there's a clause. He said there's specific clauses for new events.
Yeah,
and it says quote, a street race is mentioned. So Amazon has a street race next year, do they not?
They do.
So they went
San Diego.
They got Mexico this year. That was that wasn't a street race, but they got Mexico this year,
which was a big event.
And now they are getting another new event, which is the San Diego street race. So it sounds like they're going to be, if there's going to be street races essentially in the future, I bet those will go in the Amazon part of the season, or probably. That was what it sounded like.
Do you ever struggle to read your own writing?
Well, yeah, look at it.
I know, it's just horrible. I'm having a horrible time today.
By the way, I'd like to let you guys know about a great thing that you can use. So Chat GPT, if you take a picture of your writing, as bad as this writing is, as bad as this chicken scratch is, if I take a picture of my notes and upload it to ChatGPT, ChatGPT will read my handwriting and transcribe my notes. I mean, perfectly. And it'll even say, you highlighted this part in yellow, or you put a star next to this part. Isn't that crazy?
It's crazy. Technology.
Anyway.
This is an interesting nugget.
Okay, sorry.
Now we're going to hop on back to SRX. Is that where
okay.
we're right here? Where are you at?
Well, right before that, this I think was a key thing to remember, and it's something that's been brought up, but I marked it as a key thing to remind everybody here, because I needed to remind myself, because they were talking before about, well, you could race at these tracks, or you could start this. As Jeffrey Kessler says, this case is about the premier level of stock car racing, right? This isn't just about stock car racing. Like, it's not just because they brought up the Cars Tour, right? Because Steve O'Donnell says, well, we let the Cars Tour race at North Wilkesboro. We don't invoke the
which is a
clause,
and that's a Speedway Motorsports track,
and that's a stock car series. So what do you guys? Well, Jeffrey Kessler says Cars Tour is not a premier series, is it? And he says you can't just compete at small tracks if you're at the premier level, like the level NASCAR is at. That's what this is about. So Steve O'Donnell says, well, I don't know. So Judge Bell says he had telegraphed this yesterday, that he was going to press the witnesses if they weren't answering the question, which he felt like was the case here. So he
tried to get everybody speed up.
Right. So he turns to Steve O'Donnell and says, in your mind, is it a premier series? And Steve O'Donnell says the Cars Tour is a touring series. So he says no. So now go please with your SRX thing.
Jeffrey Kessler asked Steve O'Donnell, when was it that SRX went from this auxiliary series that you thought was a good idea to something that you were now concerned about? And Steve O'Donnell specifically says, when I saw Chase Elliott in the same stylized number 9 car with Napa on it, racing. And that was at the Nashville Fairgrounds in the finale of the inaugural SRX season. And that was the moment in Steve O'Donnell's mind when SRX went from this cute little fun thing, retired drivers, to, oh, this could be something more. We need to keep an eye on this. This could be a potential competitor.
Yes. Thank you for bringing that up. That's exactly what I had. So great job there. We're almost done with Steve O'Donnell, folks. We're almost done. It's been an entire day. I looked up. He had started his testimony at 10:25 a.m. Yesterday, Thursday. He ends up finishing his testimony at 10:45 a.m. today. So he took up, they had a lot for him. Anyway, last few things for Steve O'Donnell. They note that IndyCar, has this number been out there? Maybe it probably was. Right?
I feel like it has.
I don't know. I'm not sure I knew this.
Do you
guys know what IndyCar is getting per year? Everybody's like, oh, IndyCar's on Fox. NASCAR should be on Fox. NASCAR's on network TV. How come, or IndyCar's on network TV? How come NASCAR can't get on network TV? Blah, 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 right? You guys know how much the IndyCar TV deal is per year with Fox? $8 million per year, period. $8 million. Fox is only giving IndyCar $8 million a year to do the entire season. Yes, they're putting it on Fox, but what a deal!
But that's the catch, though, is it is on Fox for less, because their trade-off was, we're going to put all our races on network TV, but we're going to take less money, and the hope is that you make that on the back end with sponsorship and everything else. And so NASCAR, when they had negotiated their TV deal, they took more money, but they had the trade-off was they had to put more of their races on cable.
So the reason this gets brought up, Jordan, is because they say, well, you're saying that you're only giving 45% of your TV money to the teams, and you say you can't give any more, you go bankrupt and all this stuff. They say, well, IndyCar, they pay out $20 million a year to their teams. They only get $8 million a year from the TV contract. How does that happen? Steve O'Donnell, I don't think he had an answer for that, right? He just said, I don't know.
He said that's not my.
Yeah. Okay, last thing. he talks about permanent charters. Jeffrey Kessler says, okay, you don't want to give permanent charters, right? But why couldn't you just have permanent charters where the economics, the financials, are not fixed, and have NASCAR, but not have NASCAR have the right to take them? The economics part of it, and the car could change, the schedule could change, and we need to be flexible, O'Donnell says. And he says what he was urging with everybody was the language that showed the intent to renew, not that they were permanent charters, but rather it was something specific about how, look, we need to, it wasn't evergreen or permanent, but it was like their intention to renew them every year. And so Kessler says, so Mr. France rejected that. And O'Donnell says, the board did, Mr. France and the board. So I was as close as Steve O'Donnell came in his entire testimony to really putting it on Mr. France.
And a quick note on that, if you look back earlier in the week, the suggestion by the plaintiffs is that the board is Jim. And there is emails were sent, they're referring to the board as Jim. So if the board is rejecting it, the thinking is that Jim is rejecting it.
Okay, Jordan, here we go. You then had to step out of the courtroom to write, and so I think you missed most of this one, which I missed most of another one later. So this might be a little bit of a monologue here.
Take it away.
11:05 a.m. They call their next witness, Heather Gibbs. Okay, and I'm sorry, Shannon McMenemy is going to want to know later what the name of the woman who did who did the direct examination. And she was a lawyer we hadn't heard from yet, and I didn't catch her name. I apologize. So this is the Heather Gibbs story, okay? She talks about how in 1995 she moves to North Carolina. She meets Coy Gibbs on a blind date. They get married 4 years later. JGR formed as a dream on a napkin with 17 employees, 7 of which, by the way, still work there, and they're coming up on their 35th anniversary. Pretty impressive.
That's crazy.
2019, things start to not be so good because JD Gibbs passes away. But she feels like, from her standpoint, Coy Gibbs, who had to slide into that role when JD got sick, his brother, was settling into that role. She felt like things were going to be okay after a few years. Ty Gibbs was a budding young driver. So then we come up to Phoenix, November 5th, 2022. She talks about how they have 4 kids, Heather and Coy, and they've always had one going one place and one going another place. And on this weekend, they left their other 3 kids at home because they were both mom and dad were going to go focus on Ty. See if he could go win the championship, right? So he's obviously racing for the Xfinity Series Championship. He wins it. One of the most special times ever. Coy is in the press room talking about how proud he is of his son. And she says, quote, Coy, obviously you guys know later that night, quote, didn't wake up. He passed away that night. We were there together. He did not wake up the next morning. It was unexpected and incredibly tragic. She talks about, she's never talked about this publicly before until now in front of an open courtroom. You can imagine how tough that was. She talks about how hard it was on her at the time because you're grieving and you have your own immense pain, but also you're trying to feel that your kids have lost their father, that Joe Gibbs has lost his other son. Her kids were wondering what's going to happen to our family and everything we have. And so she decided, she was a very, very, very successful real estate agent. She decides to leave the real estate and step into a leadership role at JGR. She becomes co-owner at JGR. And she decides that there was, the man that she was going to spend the rest of her life with, she decides she's going to spend the rest of her life, quote, fighting for what he believed in, which was this company. And for them, Joe Gibbs Racing is truly, the family business, right? Like she says, unlike a lot of these other teams, they don't have, car dealerships and all this stuff to fund their race. This is their business. Yeah. And so it's, she says it's always been for her and everybody, one of the scariest things thinking about the future, because they have to have sponsors or they're done, right? That's their business. By the way, as an aside, they're asking her, how many wins does Joe Gibbs Racing have? They say, how many championships does Joe Gibbs Racing have? She says, we have 5. It should have been 6.
I wonder what she's referring to.
Yeah, they actually said, are you referring to the man in this courtroom, Denny Hamlin?
What was Denny's reaction?
He laughed.
Okay, that's good. At least you can laugh about it now.
So last night, Jordan did the honors of reading you guys the Heather Gibbs letter, or a portion of that at least. So, this is a letter that she sent to the France family, basically pleading for permanent charters. So now they ask her about this, right? So she says, Heather Gibbs says she's a processor. We know these type of people. Some of us are these type of people where, sometimes you're in a meeting or a moment, and later you feel something about it and you want to express it, but in the moment it's hard to come up with the words, or you know what I'm saying? So that she says that describes her. And she says when Steve Phelps told her in their individual meetings that JGR was, quote, reckless with their spending, that really bothered her. And so later she thinks about how much it bothered her, and she sends this letter. This is what prompted her to send this letter. Okay. Because she couldn't articulate it at the time. And from her standpoint, she feels like every penny matters to them. They're using their sponsorship. She says, everything's going back into the race team. We're reinvesting to keep our race team alive, to keep this going, to keep our family business going. And so that's why she sent this letter. And for her, she says evergreen charters are important, because they've got to have a permanent place in the sport. And she says, look, if you need us to meet certain standards to make them auto renew, that's fine. But she says we call them evergreen because permanent was a trigger word for Jim France. So that's why the evergreen term got adopted. Jim France did not like hearing permanent, so everybody just started saying, what if we call them evergreen?
And the reason it was explained in court why they went to that term was that there are a lot of franchisees. Bob Jenkins owns fast food franchises. Rick Hendrick obviously owns car dealerships. And in that world, that is a term they use as part of that. And so they thought, hey, if we can't use the word permanent, let's pluck this from our business dealings. And evergreen's a word that we use all the time. And we'll basically use that as a substitute. And that now has basically become synonymous with permanent charters. And largely, it's an interchangeable word.
So she gets a response to this letter, despite we hear that Jim France was cursing. Well, it turns out not cursing, but at least very frustrated, vocally frustrated out loud while reading her letter. She gets a call a few days later. Lisa France Kennedy reaches out. They had a very nice convo, and it seems like it was well received, she says. And so she sent a follow-up email to Lisa about Evergreen, that solution, saying that they're absolutely vital for the teams to get that security, and just know that what we built can't be taken away. So she thinks, hey, things are actually maybe moving toward that at this point. As we know, that doesn't happen. So we're getting to some juicy key stuff here. It's September 6th, the infamous September 6th, going down as a very infamous day in NASCAR history.
Very much so.
Yeah.
We're going to write about this for many, many years to come.
Yeah. We were there, by the way. We were there in Atlanta going through all this. I keep thinking about that.
I was thinking that too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wild. I mean, we're running around the garage talking to people and trying to
calling
figure it out.
People left and right, texting. Yeah.
Anyway, September 6th. She is trying to take one of her sons to Chapel Hill for a baseball game. And they had been having, she obviously knew, lengthy discussions, and they didn't seem to be going anywhere. Well, all of a sudden Friday, they get this notification. You have to here's the final draft of the charter agreement. You have till 5 p.m. to sign it. Steve O'Donnell confirmed to Dave Alpern, president of JGR, if you don't sign your charter, it's gone. Well, Joe Gibbs Racing, they freaked out. I mean, this was panic, absolute panic. What do we do? They weren't ready for this yet. They felt like, she said it was very upsetting. They felt like this is the legacy of Coy, her husband, the legacy of JD, the legacy of 450 employees they have. There was an emotional moment, she recounts, where Joe Gibbs is pleading with Jim France, saying, don't do this to us. And Jim France responds that he's done and says, if I wake up and I have 20 charters, I have 20. If I have 30, I have 30. She says also, like, that was a problem for them, is that she does these real estate contracts, right, Jordan? And she's saying that, you know, she does these real estate deals. If your middle name is even spelled wrong on one of these things, you got to redo the whole thing.
Yeah,
and
it can invalidate the contract.
Right. So she says the charter agreement that gets sent is riddled with grammatical errors. She says this is something in business. You would never sign this. And they were being pressured to sign it. She said it was, she used the gun to the head thing again that Shannon McMenemy, our friend, has been saying is a theme. And she says it was, they held a gun to the head, and if you don't sign it, everything is gone. So she goes to, you know, she leaves the office. She leaves 84-year-old Joe Gibbs. This is the picture she paints. 84-year-old Joe Gibbs is in the office in the dark. His blood sugar monitor is beeping because he hasn't eaten all day. She can hear it. He has to sign this. We can't lose this. She's on the phone trying to read this thing, trying to drive to Chapel Hill, trying to tell them how to do a DocuSign. But they just said there was too many livelihoods at stake, and Joe Gibbs Racing had to sign this deal. That was a pretty powerful, effective moment, I got to say, Jordan, sitting in that courtroom, because the jury, just like with Bob Jenkins, they heard Bob Jenkins' story and that felt like they connected with him. You know, a widow is telling her story and about her family and how much it means. And the imagery of Joe Gibbs pleading, don't do this to us. And I mean, wow, that was powerful, Jordan, I have to say.
Sounds like it.
Yeah.
What was her, was there any tearing up or anything, or what was her kind of facial reactions and everything else?
She got a little bit choked up, but she didn't, you know, have a moment where she was, you know, crying on the stand or something that was like a, you know, couldn't get the words out or something. I mean, it was, you know, it was hard for her to talk about. She had to take a sip of water and stuff, but I mean, it wasn't, you know, like she just couldn't get through it or broke down. She was, you know what I'm saying? And
then in the courtroom, what was that like? Was it just really quiet and just everybody kind of intently listening?
Yeah, you know, I was watching the jury to see was anybody wiping their tears or anything like that. I didn't see any of that, but they were just very intently locked on her story. They were very engaged, and she, you know, at times would turn to the jury and, you know, talk to them as well, kind of thing, I noticed. So yeah. A couple other things before we get to the end of Heather Gibbs. Just these are more little nuggets. Because they don't have the big sponsors anymore, like the big FedEx, or, you know, they still have Bass Pro and stuff, but, you know, they used to have just anchor sponsors like M&M's and stuff, right? JGR now has 26 different sponsors. I think they're going to have this year. She said that we scraped and clawed to get 26 sponsors across their 4 cars. She obviously says she's anti-cost cap. She says, I don't know how you could compare our situation to a small team. It would be impossible. We want to be the best every week. That's not the case with the other teams. By the way, she says that the 2311 Alliance, 2311 pays Joe Gibbs Racing $5.8 million per year to have that. It was odd. They asked if it was renewed. They said this expires in December, and they asked if it was renewed. And she said, I can't answer that. But I couldn't tell if she can't answer that because she didn't know or couldn't speak to it, or because she can't say.
I saw this part of it, and I'm pretty confident it was just she didn't know. Because there's a couple I don't knows that they were asking her about contracts, guys, about Denny Hamlin's contract and stuff. Mm-hmm. And she's like, that's not my realm. That's our chief financial officer. And then this was the thing too, is then this is just not her. That's not her area.
They tried to get her to say that Joe Gibbs Racing, obviously one of the biggest teams, is profitable. And she said that some years we are, some years we aren't. Not every year, that's for sure. There's been a couple years where sponsorship was very low, and they have a savings account that they dip into. Finally, this little nugget, apropos of nothing, they're asking about what drivers they have. They say, Denny Hamlin, he's popular, right? And she says, depends what track you're at.
All right, here we go.
Are you ready for?
After Heather Gibbs, we take a lunch break. And when we come back from lunch, we know that Michael Jordan is going to be on the witness stand. Can we set the scene really quick?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's start with the beginning of the week. Beginning of the week, day one of the trial, a lot of people there, a lot of media there, just a lot of people there, a lot of people in the industry there, packed courtroom, right? Very packed courtroom. Kind of thins out, kind of going into the week. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, there's room to be had. If you want to show up and sit, you can, okay? Today, and you get there, at the beginning of the day, definitely more people there. And it was like, oh, okay. You kind of look around. It was, I wouldn't say like full, but it was pretty good. You know, it was almost there, right? So Heather testifies, take a lunch break, you come back, and the courtroom is slammed.
We barely got in.
I had to talk my way. I was told I had to talk my way past a marshal. By the way, we talked earlier in the week about making friends with people. I made friends with the marshals. I got in. That's why. But yeah, like they were very restrictive. You had to get there. I think you were there 15 minutes, 20 minutes early.
No, I only got in a little bit before you.
Oh, really?
And I only talked my way in because we had our seat cushions.
Yes, seat cushions saved the day again.
Really? I mean, he's like, no, I don't think you know. No. And I'm like, no, I'm right there. I'm right next to that guy. That's my seat cushion right there. He's like, okay. But other people were getting turned away.
I was pointing at you. I'm like, that's my spot. They're like, no. You can't. And I'm like, I saved my spot. They're like, you can't save your seat. I'm like, no, I promise you my notebook is on there. And I was sitting there. And they're like, okay, go.
Yeah.
And they were nice. But yes, so this is 15. So usually during the week, you get back from lunch, you can walk in like 30 seconds beforehand. No big deal. You can, if you're even a few minutes late, not a big deal. Today, though, very different. You had to get there 15 minutes. You really jam-packed. They stopped letting people in, and they would not let people. If you left, you weren't getting back in, and they made that very clear. So the courtroom is packed, and the reason it's packed is because of who's taking the witness stand next.
Yeah, Judge Bell says, I take it Mr. Jordan is next, looking at all the crowd. And he says, okay, nobody is entering this courtroom. He says, we cannot have turnstiles for this examination.
Yep.
So Michael Jordan walks up in his Navy suit.
Good looking suit.
The jury, by the way, they say, okay, we call Michael Jordan as the next witness, right? I thought it was going to be like the jury's going to go, oh, as he walks by. They didn't even look at him.
Nothing. It was really like non-pulse. There was people looking at him. Like one woman put her glasses on, but I was like, oh.
No, but I'm saying as he walked by, they weren't like,
oh, they weren't in awe. They were not in awe. They were looking at him, but they were not in awe.
So he has trouble adjusting his chair.
He was great. I mean, he was very glib. It was great. Completely diffused this. Like he lightened the mood.
Did he?
I thought so. Yeah, because like people are like kind of like, oh, what's this gonna be like? That kind of thing. Yeah. He goes up there and he starts cracking a couple jokes, and it was like just kind of he brought the tone down a little bit.
So, as they do, they ask everybody to state their full name. He says, my name is Michael Jeffrey Jordan, and I grew up in Wilmington, North Carolina, just like any other witness. Mr. Jordan, did you play any sports? I've heard you were pretty good at basketball. I used to be, he says. He talks about his career, he played for the Chicago Bulls. She says, did you play for any other teams? He says, I tried to forget, but I did.
Big laugh.
Big laugh for the Washington Wizards reference there. He talks about how he was 11 or 12 years old when he went to his first race. His dad was friends with Haas Ellington, and their dad used to take the family to Rockingham, Talladega, Charlotte, Darlington. His mom, dad, older brother, and younger sister, they'd pile in the car, and they'd drive everywhere. As far as Talladega, all the way from Wilmington. He called it their weekend vacation. Richard Petty was originally his favorite driver because that was his dad's favorite driver, but eventually he became a fan of Cale Yarborough. He says he was the first original 11. Sorry, Denny. He lost touch a little bit with NASCAR when he went to college, but he talks about how he was really a lifelong fan.
loves the sport, grew up in the sport. Dad loved the sport. He's followed the sport. And still follows. I mean, obviously he's a Kona today, but even made a comment about NASCAR TV coverage. I asked him how many races you go to. He's like, about a dozen or so. He goes, when I'm not there though, thanks to NASCAR's media rights package, I'm able to watch all of the races.
Yeah, he says he never misses a race. He says, I don't miss a race. So wherever he is, he watches. Obviously, we already know kind of the story about how he and Denny came to be as team owners together. Again, I write here that the jury didn't seem starstruck here. Says he's got a 60% interest in the team. He says he describes his role at 23XI as I'm more or less a fan and financial support. I'm 100 feet up. I'm a fan, but I'm still tied into the business. I'm somewhat aware of everything that happens. So Curtis Polk's constantly telling him all the stuff that's going on, right? They ask him, why did you buy the Stewart Haas racing charter in 2024 for $28 million? He says, I'm pretty sure people know I like to win. Denny had convinced him that it would improve the team's chances to win a championship. He felt the need, the opportunity presented himself, and he was invested into NASCAR. So even though this deal wasn't done and they could lose their charters, he was willing to do it. And he says he's actually put in $35 to $40 million so far into 23XI racing,
which he owns 60% of, by the way.
Yeah. He says the way we conduct our business is a high-end, first-class organization, and I provide certain services, and that those services are that he goes and gets the sponsorship, right? They say he is making a profit at 23XI because of the sponsorship they have. They say, does that mean that the charter agreement is fair? He says, no, it's not fair. So they say, well, charter values have gone up. Does that mean that the increase, does that mean it's fair? No, because the reason it went up is because you have a limited amount of entries and it creates a competitive price. So what does he see that's broken? He says, listen, the NBA is a partnership. Here it's a private entity. The thing I'm hoping for is that you can create more of a partnership between two entities. If that's the case, it becomes a more valuable business. So he's striking this tone here, Jordan, about I'm not here to tear the sport apart. I'm here to try to figure out how we can work together is what a theme of what his testimony was.
He mentioned the word partnership, together many, many, many times. This was, as you said, Jeff, a common theme throughout his testimony of unity, working together. He gave examples from his time in the NBA and the players union over there. This isn't somebody who's looking to tear down the sport, but to improve it and make it better for everybody because he loves it and wants to see it have success.
He says, if you can ever compromise on things that matter, you can grow your business. He uses an example. So, I mean, I don't know the economics of this, but he's saying, so in the NBA, the deal is that if the business is good in the NBA, I assume that means a certain amount of revenue coming in. 50.9% goes to the players and 49% goes to the owners. If the business is bad, that percentage flips. So he's using that as an example of if you can work together, you can figure this stuff out. He says he attended a lot of meetings for the charter negotiations. He was there to understand what the teams were asking for. He didn't sign the agreement because, number one, didn't think it was economically viable for 23XI. Number two, there was the clause in there that said, if you sign the charters, then you can't sue NASCAR for antitrust reasons, which he obviously wanted to reserve that right. And number three, it was the ultimatum that felt like didn't suit 23XI, that the take it or leave it deadline. It wasn't something he was going to go for. He talks about, these four pillars that the teams wanted, which everybody can sort of recite now, right? It was more money, it was the $20 million to cover their costs. It was the permanent charters. It was the seat at the table, which is essentially the three strikes rule, the governance.
Yep. And
they wanted 1/3 of all new revenues that were coming into NASCAR. 1/3 because they thought if the teams could get 1/3 and NASCAR needed to give 1/3 to the tracks and then NASCAR could take 1/3, everybody would split it evenly. Obviously, none of that happened. The teams did get a little bit more money, so that they count that later. We find out from Jonathan Marshall, the RTA, as a half win. But the other three things, permanent charters, no. Seat at the table, they lost it. They used to have it, lost it. And the 1/3 of all new money coming into NASCAR, no.
Their money they get again is coming for the media rights deal.
So Michael Jordan says nobody even negotiated. There was no compromise on these 4 pillars, which are the 4 things they said they had to have. So if those aren't going to be put on the table, why are we signing this deal? And after that, after we didn't sign it, we looked at every opportunity from that point on, and that's how we ended up here in this courtroom. He talks about the revenue split, and it's way less than any other business I've been partners with. That's something we wanted to move on. And he says, NASCAR is saying that they gave us the set number and the floor, but he really wanted a percentage of a guaranteed percentage. He didn't care about the number. He wanted to guarantee the percentage because he says, then we're all in it together. We can, if you move up, we move up. If you move down, we move down too. He could accept that, but he wanted a percentage. He said, I didn't think we could ever get to what basketball was getting, the 50%, but he was hopeful that they could move more in that direction. So why did he file this lawsuit, he's asked. He talks about he's trying to fight for the economics for every team. Someone had to step forward and challenge this entity. He was in these meetings with team owners, and he said they were browbeaten for so many years trying to get change and just could not get to that point. I wasn't afraid. He felt he had to challenge NASCAR, and as a fan of other sports, it needed to be looked at from a whole different perspective, and that's why we're here. Have anything to add before we get across?
No, it was very straightforward. It was
soft-spoken, kind of.
Yeah, and charming.
Calm.
I mean, calm, glib, made a couple good jokes. Made the courtroom laugh. It was good. Yeah. I don't know what we expected, but it was very, I don't say uneventful almost.
Yeah. So Larry Buterman is doing the cross-examination here. We know that Larry Buterman, he got under Denny's skin a little bit, right? Yeah. And we know that he can jab,
just pokes.
He can be very aggressive, right? We know this.
He's kind of their attack attorney, if you will.
But in this case, no, he takes a completely different tactic. So
it was very odd. I will talk about this more later.
Yeah,
this was odd.
In fact, he really sort of jokes around with Michael Jordan, puts him up on a pedestal, so to speak, and really was almost
intimidated,
deferential. I don't think he was
intimidated, but differential is a good word. That's the really good word.
He was a fan of him, kind of.
There was some fanboy. I mean, he said as much at the end, kind of.
Yeah. I mean, there was a moment where they say, you can only win if you have a certain player in your starting 5, right? And Michael Jordan said, depends where he's from. And Larry Buterman, the NASCAR attorney, says, from North Carolina. Yeah. And it was like, he really liked, he said, and they knew each other before from the deposition. Yeah. It was clear, right? So they had a little bit of banter when they started. He said, good to see you again, kind of thing, right? So one thing that Buterman points out is that Michael Jordan, in his projection, they only thought he was going to get a $900,000 profit. So that wasn't like a big, he wasn't expecting to make millions here, I guess, right? There's text from Curtis Polk to Michael Jordan that they show. It says Curtis Polk didn't want to do this deal. He says, this is going to take a lot of work. This is risky to your brand and your image. You're going to risk tens of millions costing the Jordan brand, but you want to do it, so I'm doing my best to manage it. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, another thing too, throughout, Michael was very credited NASCAR a lot. Like, talked about how they worked really hard. The France that he has built this up. Very respectful, very complimentary in a lot of ways, and just basically said, we just want a better deal. Like, we don't want to ruin NASCAR. I respect him. They worked really hard on this. We just would like a better deal.
Yeah, I think he even says I would never question the France family's contribution. So he does say that. So he's presented with texts now from Curtis Polk that he says, how are the talks going? He texts Curtis Polk. He says I'm going to meet with 8 to 9 teams, and some of the smaller teams, they think that they might settle for 11 million team. We need to educate them on why this would never be accepted by all the teams. So it sounds like Buterman's sort of setting them up here to say, you told these teams not to do this deal. You were trying to influence them, right? Michael Jordan says, listen, we wanted them to understand what was fair and not fair based on the economics. we were trying to benefit them to ask for a much more favorable deal. He says the charters, it's not just other sports, but just business in general. You've got to create the environment to explain to other teams that you should be looking at this from a stronger economic position to not just benefit the teams, but the league as a whole. Again, he says he wants to benefit NASCAR as a whole. They say at one point, they say, you felt that NASCAR welcomed you, yes? He says, well, I paid to get in. But he says, he does say yes. He says, you have to admire what the France family accomplished, to your point. They deserve credit. At one point, he had said they deserve credit for the new car schedule, diverse fan base. And he says, I'm not discrediting what NASCAR has done for the sport. What's being missed here is the credit that should be going to the drivers and teams as well. There's no union, nothing to benefit them. I want the sport to grow and unify the teams. He criticizes the DAP program as well because he says that they're utilizing our assets, and we need to use that to drive our business. We want to be able to control the drivers for our own benefit to help our sponsorship. And if anything, NASCAR should give the money to the teams and let the teams pay the drivers. So they talk about how, Buterman wraps up by saying, thank you for making my 9-year-old think I'm cool today. And Michael Jordan says, you're not wearing your Jordans today. I guess he's worn Jordans before or something. And it was just a weird sort of like.
The attorney said that he will start wearing them after the trial.
Yeah, that's right.
That was it.
Yeah.
I mean, that was it. It was very anticlimactic.
Yeah, that was it.
It was
it
like
was 1 hour.
It was like on the dot, 1 hour. That was it. And now I think about it, like there was some things there. Michael talked about his association in the time in the NBA. I don't know if people know this now, but Michael basically overthrew the Players Association in there. So we'll ask this question later to Shannon, stuff like that. Of like, is that stuff to bring up? Is that relevant when you talk about togetherness and working together with the league? Is it acceptable to bring up, this in the past? I don't know. It's an interesting thing, but it felt like there were some things left on the table. But we move on.
So this is going to be the Jordan soliloquy now, because next up is Jonathan Marshall. He is the executive director of the RTA, the Race Team Alliance. I needed to step out for 40 minutes to write my story about Michael Jordan, so I missed the first 40 minutes. I'm anxious to hear what Jonathan Marshall had to say for those 40 minutes, as all of you are. So, Jordan, take it away.
All right. Well, thank you, Jeff. It's not going to be too in-depth here because there is a lot of numbers and a lot of things that we've covered and recapped previously, but I'll give you a treetops version here. Jonathan Marshall, who those don't know, is the executive director of the RTA. The RTA is basically a group of the 15 charter holding teams, 13 charter holding teams plus Front Row and 2311, who no longer own their charters as of right now. But these 15 NASCAR teams basically work together on various things, issues in the sport, future growth, that kind of thing. And Jonathan was brought in 2018 in this role. So he did not have any input in the 2016 charter agreement. And he is actually, in an interesting note here, isn't really involved in any of these meetings with NASCAR. He's not meeting on behalf of the RTA in terms of, hey, we need to do this in the charter agreement, that kind of thing. He is as he says, there's lots of communication, executing, and organization in my role. But he is he basically kind of herds the cats, if you will. Everybody's got different agendas. He takes everybody's agendas, tries to, find common ground and work for them forward. They spent a good amount of time on this. And then they talked about when Jonathan came in 2018 and the model then and where things were at. And he said there was a lot of financial stress on the teams. There was a lot of financial concern in 2018. A lot of the teams were struggling to find and maintain sponsorships. And as we know, the sport at that time, as we've heard, at least on the team side, they were losing a lot of money. The cost of operating a NASCAR team were continuing to go up and up, and the revenues were going down. Bad combination, he says. He enacted and he also said there was 18 6. There's only 6 of the original 18 RTA teams remaining. 6 of 18, he says. And then he enacted a study from 2005 to 2020 of teams that started the Daytona 500 over that 15-year span. He says 50 teams that started Daytona 500 over that 15 years, they are gone from the sport from all intent purposes. They either sold their charters and got out. Or
How many?
50.
50?
50. From 2005 to 2020, of the teams that started the Daytona 500, 50 are gone.
Wow. All right.
Yeah. And then we talked about the 2020 renewal and how that wasn't a negotiation at all. It was literally just, in his words, a renegotiation. It was just agreeing to the terms that are already there. And those terms that were enacted in 2016 with some minor changes carried forward. And that takes us to 2020, the 2022 era, when they started negotiating the deal, the charter agreement, which again, Jonathan wasn't involved in the meetings kind of thing, but he was involved with the lawyers and talking with them. And this is the part where they really get into the weeds. They start talking about franchise evaluations in other sports and how looking at the NFL, the NBA, Major League Baseball, Major League Soccer, and the NHL, they have seen franchise values in those sports basically skyrocket over the last 10 years or so. And they attribute that to various factors. And one of the things that they said is that because these teams are making so much revenue, they are able then to turn around and sell those teams for about 6 times more than that revenue. So basically, he says that if you're making $100 million in revenue, you can turn around and sell your team for $600 million.
Okay.
So they go over a bunch of graphs and numbers and stuff related to this. They said that even though the last charter was sold for $45 million, it's not at the same multiplier as you see in other sports. So while yes, the charters are going up in value, one time they were being sold for just under $2 million back in 2016, 2017, and the last one got sold this past summer for $45 million. It's not on the same incline compared to other sports, according to Jonathan Marshall. They hired a outside group called the Wasserman Group, a third party to advise on media rights in advance of the NASCAR deal, to kind of give them a little bit of background on what they could expect. Because we've heard throughout all of these conversations, a lot of the money in the charter deal was NASCAR saying, if we get X amount of dollars, we are going to give you this. And there was an expectation that it was going to be a certain figure. That figure was not met. Therefore, the teams got less money than they anticipated. But the teams did hire an outside agency, though, to kind of do some valuation of their media rights thing. And so they could just plan ahead and knew what to expect going into negotiations. Jonathan Marshall reiterated NASCAR charter agreement has much less favorable terms than other pro sports teams have in theirs. And again, we went over a bunch of graphs and numbers compared to NFL, NBA, NHL, and Formula One was included in this too in terms of percentages and everything. And NASCAR well below those. This is an interesting point. Someone's phone went off in court at this time and started playing a video of Michael Jordan.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Wow.
And he couldn't figure out how to turn it off.
No way.
Yeah. They were sitting right. He was I think he's one of MJ's guys.
Oh.
And the older gentleman we were talking about earlier.
Oh, yeah.
And he's sitting behind MJ, and all of a sudden, I don't know, he's looking at his phone, because you're not supposed to have phones in this court, by the way. Only select people are supposed to have phones in court. And we're not allowed to. And his phone started going off, and it was a video, and he couldn't figure out how to turn it off, and he was doing the fumbling thing. And
oh, man.
And I will say, Judge Bell, who we like a lot, actually did not admonish him or anything. He's like, it's okay. And they moved on, and everything was that. So it was an interesting moment. Then we talked about baseline costs, and then we've heard the number a lot, about $20 million. We went over how we got to that number and the studies that went into that, which we've discussed before. So I'm trying not to repeat a bunch of stuff here, so I apologize. That number includes, again, that is just getting the car to the track, the car itself. That's not business overhead. It's not driver salaries, that kind of thing. Looking here. Interesting nugget here. So this is, as I told you, how Jonathan isn't a lot involved in a lot of the financials and things, that kind of thing. Particularly, the teams really aren't sharing their financials straight up with him. He kind of removes himself. He didn't even know Denny Hamlin's salary, for example, because they were asking how much do drivers make, what's the high end for driver salary, and what's the low end for driver salary. He goes, I don't know. They're like, how do you not know? He goes, I don't ask about this. He goes, I just found out about Denny Hamlin's salary this week. As we knew, it was $14 million. He goes, they asked him, is it an expensive proposition to attend all 36 races? He goes, looks to be about $20 million.
That's a good line.
It's a good line. And he explains the expenses of traveling to NASCAR races that teams have to incur. Haulers, for example, he explained that, flights, hotels. He called it a traveling circus. And then we get to an interesting part. I think this is kind of when you came in, so feel free to jump in any part. So as these negotiations were ongoing and everything, we've heard about SRX, we heard about how NASCAR felt like there might be a rival league, starting or potentially could start. The RTA formed something or looked at forming something called the U.S. Racing League.
Okay.
Exploratory talks. It didn't really get off the ground, but it was something they had considered and thought about, but they determined it was impossible to do. There were not enough tracks to put on a NASCAR level race.
Yes, not enough tracks in the United States to put on a NASCAR-style race series at the level that NASCAR runs. He says because all the great tracks are already run by NASCAR. Those tracks are either locked up or owned by NASCAR, so they wouldn't want to do it. So it was interesting because he said they looked at how could you do it, and they concluded it's just not possible, impossible, as he said. So now we had seen documents that maybe NASCAR or the teams could go run a race in Oman, Muscat, Oman, right on the water there. I've actually randomly been there to that exact picture that they showed. I was not scouting. Yes, that was one of the few places I've been, but I've been there. And I knew it was weird when they showed that picture of the waterfront. I was like, oh, yeah, okay. I didn't think that could be a place where you'd have a NASCAR race, but anyway.
I didn't think there't be a NASCAR race on
Well, I guess it would be a NASCAR race, but
downtown Chicago. So
anyway, they looked at it, but it was nothing. It never even went anywhere. Basically, it was completely this. They never did any serious.
No,
this was not going to happen. Basically. So now we get to the charter negotiations. Of course, he says he's not allowed in any of the meetings by NASCAR.
No, none.
So all the stuff he knows is from the TNC, and then the lawyers that the RTA has in there. They're relaying stuff, but NASCAR would not let him in any of the meetings. Jonathan Marshall.
No. So, and can I talk about NASCAR? Yeah. So NASCAR made their first formal written offer to the teams on December 23rd, 2023 at 10:06 p.m. a Friday night, December 23rd, 2 days before Christmas on a Friday night at 10:06.
And they say, it sounds like it's memorable that you know that. And he said, yeah, because it was 10 p.m. on a Friday night before Christmas.
2 days before Christmas.
But they say that this was very disappointing, this offer they got, because they realized, and he made the chart. He's the one that has the origins of the chart now known as the Amanda chart. But they realized that somehow they went backwards. They feel like from the issues that they were trying to get on, right? Like they wanted these 4 pillars. And by the way, so it was interesting, Jordan, because he talks about, we ended up going with the 4 pillars because they originally had 20 to 20, the teams had 20 to 23 issues that they thought were important for the next charter deal, right? Okay. So they're having no success at all on this list of 20. So the teams go, all right, listen, we're not getting anywhere with these 20 things that we want. So why don't we just do 4? Let's just do 4. And if we get these 4, we'll be happy with it. Well, ultimately, as we know, they only got half. They got a little bit more money, essentially, right? Or more money. They got decent more money, but not close to what they wanted. Again, they didn't get the permanent charters. They didn't get the governance, and they didn't get the 1/3 of all revenue split. So they're disappointed, right? So he gets this offer, and they were just he says Jeff Gordon said to him, I've never been in a negotiation that went backward. And this is by May 2024, the next contract went backward from the Christmas contract offer. Some of the areas have been tightened up, and they thought they had somewhat productive talks. So at this point, they're like, man. So he writes this email on May 30th, 2024, that says, I don't believe it's an overstatement to say nearly every provision in the May 28th charter draft puts teams in a worse position versus the existing charter draft. The 7-7 deal, like, so that again, they signed this term for 7 years, and then they could extend whatever.
Basically, it's considered a 7-year option.
So it turns out in this draft, there's no right to negotiate after these 7 years. Basically, it's here's the offer. You have 60 days to accept it. NASCAR is under no obligation to increase it, and they if they don't want it, they can just, that's it. You have 60 days or you're done. And there was at that time, if you didn't want to take it, then you could terminate your charters, walk away, and you had to sit out. Not only did you not take the offer because it wasn't good enough for having your charter, you give up your charter, and you still had to sit out of another stock car series for a year. They end up getting rid of this provision. That was one of the changes NASCAR was willing to make. They got rid of the sitting out for the year part, but that was still like you don't take the deal because it's not good enough. And yeah, anyway, so they felt they had very little leverage.
Yeah, that was a direct quote. Teams felt like they had very little leverage. Mr. France is the main decision maker at NASCAR.
Yeah, did you need to convince Mr. France? And he says, listen, I wasn't in the meetings, but during the negotiations, it felt that way.
Yep.
That's what that was the perception. The perception was from the team owners that Jim France was seemingly the only one who could say yes or no.
And this leads to another thing where Jonathan Marshall expressed, and the team owners were expressing, like, if ultimately, so let me take back here. Basically, NASCAR's negotiating committee consisted of Steve Phelps, Steve O'Donnell, Ben Kennedy, and Scott Prime, 4 very, very high-ranking executives within the company. That said, they couldn't sign off on a deal themselves. They had to go to the board and then have the board sign off on this. And so what the teams got frustrated with is they felt like they'd make progress, or they get somewhere. But hang on here. If Mr. France isn't going to just say yeah, then Jim France would then say no. And the teams were frustrated, like, if Jim is going to be the ultimate decision maker on yes or no, and if this is going to get approved, why is he not in here in the meeting with us? And we can communicate him with directly, and we can have a conversation and engage him and try to find some common ground, instead of having to talk to NASCAR's negotiators, who then have to go back and talk to Jim, and then they have to come back. They were trying to basically effectively streamline the process. And listen, if Jim is the decision maker, Jim should be in the room with us talking to us.
We now get some more insight, even more insight on the infamous September 6, 2024 date, which was the take it or leave it deadline, right? Jonathan Marshall wakes up in Cleveland that morning. It's a beautiful day. Says, when I woke up that morning, you could have, never convinced me today was going to be the day that we were going to have to sign, because everything still felt like things were in a state of flux. Like they said it didn't feel like teams were ready to sign. There were some provisions they had told NASCAR they were still a problem for us. So all of a sudden they start getting this deadline. And by the way, they don't even tell Jonathan Marshall.
No.
He starts hearing from teams. He's getting texts, calls. Do you hear this?
No.
6 p.m. We've got to sign. Do you know that's a real deadline? He finds out it is a real deadline.
And Steve O'Donnell and Steve Phelps at this time are calling various NASCAR owners. And as we heard from Heather Gibbs, this was one of those conversations. Steve Phelps, Steve O'Donnell were calling people, different owners, different leaders of organizations, explaining NASCAR's position, explaining why this offer was basically a take it or leave it.
And we know that it was extended to midnight, the sign or lose your charter, and 13 of the 15 teams obviously did take them up on that. Now, on September 11th, Richard Childress and was it Dave Alpern?
Yes.
Yeah, so they've emailed Jonathan Marshall now, head of the RTA, and they're saying, listen, Steve Phelps is going around on this like apology tour, or make nice tour, I guess they called it, right? And so we're going to have a meeting with Steve Phelps, and can you put together? Richard Childress wanted to know. Can you put together a list of what the proposed changes were, what all happened, and what we ended up getting, right? Like, so just so I'm not going in blind. So you know more than anybody. So you have the overview, right? So this email says that ultimately teams agreed to 90% of NASCAR's proposed changes. And so there was a list of issues. He goes down the list where the teams adopted NASCAR's position on things, right? Like this was something NASCAR wanted. Teams didn't want it. They end up going with it.
Scorecard. That's how he refers to it as scorecard.
Well, that's not this part. Anyway,
sorry.
So this part is this list of issues, right? And he goes A, B, C, D, right?
All the way.
He gets all the way down to Q. Hey, they now the teams ended up going on to so many of what NASCAR wanted. They get all the way down to Q. That includes some things that we didn't really have some insight into before. Number one, there was the France family being able to own a charter, but not just that. So the teams ended up saying, okay, France family, if you want to own a charter, okay, there's some teams wanted it because they thought that the Frances would understand their plight more, but they just wanted to make sure there was going to be restrictions, right? Like, all right, France family, if you're going to own the charter, you've got to make sure there's some restrictions that the competition, NASCAR competition, is separated for the integrity of the sport. Like, we can't have some crossover here. No, they didn't get that. They had to go with the no restrictions for this, okay? Number two, the teams before were getting $6 to $8 million in like digital media revenue. That was at least part of the calculation. And NASCAR didn't want to give that to them anymore. And so that part was gone. So they adopted that position. Another part was, so CAA is the one that did the media rights deal.
They brokered the deal.
They brokered the media rights deal, CAA, right? And so because they brokered the media rights deal, they get a cut, like they get a percentage, right? So I think he threw out $5 million. Okay, so NASCAR's got to pay CAA $5 million for getting the new 1.017 billion media rights deal, right? But
they take it out on the teams.
They say to the teams, "Hey, you got to pay for 42.7% of this deal. You guys got to pay for half of." The team's like, "What are we? That was your thing." But NASCAR's like, "No, you pay." So the teams say, "Okay, fine, we'll do that." So they agreed to that.
So, and this is why you'll often hear the team say that we only got 42, 43%. This is where that number comes from. You'll hear 45 sometimes or higher, but some people will say 42, and this is why that is. It's because when you take away commissions and everything else, which came off the top of what the team got, that's how they came up with this.
Yeah, and so you take the DAP money off, you take this commission off, and so as much as NASCAR is saying 45% there, and he says it's not like you get a statement that says this is the exact percentage you're getting. We had to figure this out. We had to go back and calculate this ourselves and figure out we're actually getting 42.7%, not from their view 40. Now NASCAR says 45%. Okay, from NASCAR's view, it's 45%, but this is the team's view that we're sharing with you today. By the way, again, this is probably something where I'm ignorant. Did you know, Jordan, that the teams don't get any of the international TV money?
I have literally told you this so many times.
Oh,
I have literally, as we have talked about these charter negotiations and things that the teams may ask for, I have literally told Jeff, one of the things you should pay attention to is maybe if the teams may ask for a piece of the international TV money, whatever that is, they don't get anything. So anything they get from that would be an upside. So yes, I did know about it. You should have known it too. But again, you don't listen to me. It's okay. As we move
on. When we're talking about the TV money, we're talking about the United States domestic TV money. That's what the teams get. TV money from any other country, Canada, wherever, no, teams don't get any of that money. So that was interesting. So now we're at the cross-examination point of Jonathan Marshall. And Jordan's going to start talking about this because our DoorDash just came, and I'm going to go bring it inside before somebody steals it from my hotel room.
It's our DoorDash sat outside for like an hour yesterday.
I know, but
we don't have that much to go. Let's just wrap this up.
Well, just let me open the door. You talk. I'll be right back.
So this is where interesting. So we talked about the defense attorney earlier, Larry, and his style is very, poke, poke, poke. And he was going after Jonathan Marshall a little bit and trying to get under his skin a little bit, trying to rattle him a little bit. And this was interesting. Jonathan Marshall really didn't get rattled too much. He kind of started making jokes and just kind of diffused the situation. He made a joke about they were asking about team sales and that kind of thing, and he goes, "This is Jonathan Marshall. When Jeannie Buss sells the Lakers for $9 million, I don't think she's sad." And he was talking about how all of these NASCAR team owners he knows have gone out of business or have had to force to sell their charters, and they don't want to. They want to be in the sport, but because of the economic model, they just couldn't continue. And these are people that he still talks to, and these other owners are upset. And so they the lawyers were going back and forth a little bit. And this is Jonathan Marshall made another quip, and it's just, again, like Denny Hamlin and Michael Jordan at the time they were laughing uproariously.
Yeah, I mean the Jeannie Buss, because again, like he's talking about how he talks to people who were sad they sold their charters when they did, but they had to get out of the sport. They had no other choice. So they had to sell them for like $1 or $2 million, or if they had held on to him, now they could have $40 million.
They were desperate.
And they're sad about this, right? And so that's why he said when Jeannie Buss sells the Lakers for whatever she sold it for, right? I don't think she's sad. That's why he said that. But he is definitely going back here with Buterman's tone completely changes.
Yeah.
And he's trying to get Jonathan Marshall.
He's trying to rattle. He's really trying to rattle.
But Jonathan Marshall really holds his own. He says at one point, he's being accused of putting these talking points out. And he says, I don't believe these are slanted talking points. They're just facts, like just straight up. Like I'm not putting bias out here, these team talking points. Like this is stuff that really happened. And he's being questioned about team owners not being honest with him and stuff. And he says at one point, why would he lie to me? That'd be weird. Yeah. So he's really trying to present a very credible case. They try to get him on this memo that he wrote when he was 30 days on the job, this white paper memo. He says he read tons of articles from the media, and he didn't really know many people at the time. He says he only knew Steve Phelps from a wedding, and he knew Jeff Gordon because Jeff Gordon's ex-wife knew his ex-wife. And that's the only people he knew. He's 30 days in the job. He writes this paper.
Reading a bunch of stuff.
Right. Reading articles. Now it's in court, and they're saying, well, you said the team's this. You said the team's this, right? And he's like, I'm only 30 days into this job. They questioned him for, 10 minutes about that. Didn't really get anywhere. At one point,
can we just real quick?
Yeah.
Credit to Jonathan Marshall. He wrote this white paper. He cited his sources. Footnotes. He footnotes. I respect that.
At one point, they're saying, you said you came from the surfing industry, which he did, and who knows more about tracks, you or Steve O'Donnell? And he says, Mr. O'Donnell. And then he pauses and he goes, that was an easy one.
Big laughs.
Big laughs. But they're trying to get him to be like, you're saying this about the tracks, but Steve O'Donnell said this, so Steve O'Donnell's going to be more credible here, kind of thing, right? He did say, they said, isn't it true that you've never met Jim France? He says, well, I did once, only inadvertently, and I'm sure he wasn't happy about it. So I shoot my eyes over to Jim France, right, when he makes this crack in the courtroom. Jim France, absolutely zero expression, complete stone face, couldn't have. Lisa actually smiled, thought it was funny, like people were laughing. But they keep presenting him with all these things. Did you prepare a memo in August 2022 for the TNC? And he's like, I don't know, but something is going to appear on the screen in front of me and show me that I did. So it's just like
he kept diffusing the situation.
Yeah, he was being very charming. I thought he was a good witness for them. And so then Judge Bell, it's getting close to 5:00, and he says, "Are you close to wrapping this up? Like, can we end this witness today?" And he says, Buterman says, I think I have probably like 45 more minutes on this. And Judge Bell's just like, ugh. So anyway, Judge Bell tells the jury, listen, next Friday, a week from today, remains the goal to end this trial. It was supposed to be for 2 weeks. But as you can tell, maybe that's not going to happen. We're going to try to keep speeding this along. He says, Everyone in this courtroom is getting paid to be here, some better than others. But he knows basically the jury's getting pretty much nothing, and they're giving up their time around the holidays. He's trying to respect their time, and it's just not looking good, Jordan. It's going to be going to a third week most likely.
I would be shocked if it didn't, Jeff.
Well, it's time, folks, to bring in our friend Shannon McMenemy. She is an attorney in Washington and a huge NASCAR fan, so the best mix of both worlds for us. And Shannon, you've been listening to us the whole time. What observations do you have about what you've heard today?
Well, I think it was a very interesting day. I actually think it was strategically great to get Michael Jordan in and out in 60 minutes, and I have some thoughts about that. But I'm going to start with the beginning and end of the day commentary by Judge Bell. What he was talking about with respect to trying to address that the teams ran this year, but not have it be phrased in a way that one side or the other is going to be objectioning to, is he's asking the teams to get together and do a stipulation where you tell the jury this fact is agreed to, and then you can save some time. It'd be great if these folks could get together and do some more stipulations, because then we might get through some of this stuff really easy, but that's what he was trying to do. So also, I love hearing that my advice about being good to the marshals worked out for you, and that my cushion recommendations have now expanded. I hear there's now, in fact, a new phrase. I understand that Denny Hamlin may have referred to them as NAS cushions.
Yeah, he walked by some of the media. I was actually out doing a little Sports Center hit. No, I was outside doing that, but I don't want to sound like bragging. Anyway,
You just did.
I know. But
Humble brag.
yeah, well, I was explaining why I wasn't there. He walked by the rest of the media, saw the cushions, and said, "Those are NAS cushions." So
I should, and to think all of this started with you guys asking me, "Can I bring a cushion?"
Right.
So I think with Steve O'Donnell, a lot of it is going back over his testimony. One would think that the dead horse beating to death comment for yesterday might have been taken to heart a little bit more. I think, in fact, now that you tell me what was happening with Jonathan Marshall at the end, I understand that the two lead attorneys got called back to meet with the judge. I think they probably did have another talk about picking up the pace, and also a realistic discussion about who else are you going to call, how long are you going to be, so that the judge has a better idea going into the weekend. And there may be things that he also suggests to them that they try and work out by stipulation, in addition to how they're going to tell the jury that the teams ran this year. Steve O'Donnell, coming back to the look and feel of the sport, I think, we've talked a bit about this. That's a reference to an area of intellectual property law called trade dress. It really isn't ever going to apply to NASCAR, because it generally applies to products and like the way you decorate a restaurant. And at the end of the day, it's about if the overall look and feel of the product or the establishment that's not functional, right? It can't be a necessary element of it. If it is so like somebody else's that a reasonable customer would be confused. And I don't think that anybody is ever going to be confused between what SRX was and what NASCAR was, just because some of the same drivers are in it. Remember, the reason why these series have drivers in them are because they're drivers someplace else. So just like the IROC back in the day, you can't really have a multi-driver, multi-series competition event without some of the drivers coming from other series.
But is there something to the fact, though, that if your network TV partner is coming to you and saying, "Hey, I'm seeing this,"
oh, that's just being mad. That's just being unhappy. It's not legally. But I think what happened is that when he got off that phone call and we saw that the text message about gotta bring legal in, that NASCAR must have had an internal discussion about what they could legally do and if they could pursue trade dress protections. I also don't think that anyone would ever confuse the cars, and that even Chase Elliott using the 9 is not the stylized 9 that HMS uses. I will not get into the weeds of trademark law and the 8 car and Dale Jr. and Teresa and all that, but that's what they're going at. Is I think at some point there must have been a conversation internally at NASCAR as to if they could get any sort of protection for the overall look and feel of the series. And that phrase, look and feel, has just stuck with Steve O'Donnell ever since. I would love to know about this potential competitor series and the list of places Steve O'Donnell lists they could go. Why doesn't NASCAR go to those places? we all know why NASCAR doesn't go. I mean, NASCAR used to go to Pikes Peak. Like, he's listing places that NASCAR took off its schedule because they weren't perceived as successful. So if there were places you wouldn't go, why are you saying that a competitor series would be able to go there? I definitely am going to circle back to, when is Curtis Polk going to be called? Well, once he got sequestered and he can't sit there for the entire trial, maybe they're having him sit, maybe they're waiting and hearing everything bad the NASCAR executives have to say about him so that they can be prepared to address that in total when they call him, right? So if they called him on first thing on Monday, we don't know what Steve Phelps is going to say about him. And if the NASCAR theme has now gone back to Curtis Polk is a bad guy, and all of this is happening because Curtis Polk is mean and we've never had anybody who was like this with us ever, then they're going to want to hear all of that before they start calling Curtis Polk and having him tell the story. I did think it was interesting that Steve O'Donnell talked about how he was never in a meeting like that in his life, that he had that perception or felt that way. But we also heard from Steve O'Donnell yesterday that he's a NASCAR lifer, right? So I would love to know what Curtis Polk's perception of those meetings are as somebody who, he was a sports agent. So in addition to the work that he does with Michael and being Michael Jordan's business partner and being involved with him in these other business deals, he was a sports agent and in the room for a lot of years in probably some really contentious meetings. I would love to know his perspective of what NASCAR business meetings are like as opposed to every other business he's ever encountered. And I think we got some of that thread today with Michael Jordan as well, in talking about the other businesses Michael Jordan has and his experience in other sports entities, as to just say, look, this isn't like Curtis Polk is some like big, powerful human being who came in and convinced everybody and made our life hard. He and I, me, Michael Jordan, and Curtis Polk have perspective because we're business people in other entities, and we know that what's happening here is not normal. So I just thought it was interesting that they keep making such a big deal out of like, Curtis Polk, but I'm like, that cuts both ways, because Curtis Polk can come in and say, hey, I have all this experience someplace else in this place. Woo boy, what should I tell you about these meetings? They were crazy. I've never been someplace where the guy who made all the decisions wouldn't even come to the meeting, blah, blah, blah.
That's interesting, yeah.
I do appreciate that Jeffrey Kessler owned up to his own emotions, and I think that was very strategic and intentional to make the I'm a New Yorker reference. If you poke fun at yourself for being a New Yorker and deflate the situation, then you don't have to worry quite so much about the jury perceiving you as being a loud-talking, fast-talking New Yorker. So I thought that was a good strategic choice on his part. Why is everybody from NASCAR working so hard to not acknowledge that the person they were talking about in this email was Jim France? The person that was being talked about in this text message was Jim France. Jim France was making the decision. Remember, Jim France is a personal party to this litigation. Jim France is an individual human being. And so if all of these different NASCAR executives acknowledge that the decision maker is Jim France, it was Jim France, not the board, that's when Jim France could face personal liability. And so that's why they are all working so hard not to say it was Jim, even when it's obvious. And that's what Judge Bell was getting at yesterday, is like, come on. We all know that you're talking about Jim France here. Spending 20 minutes to get to eventually answer, yeah, it was Jim, is not going to change the fact that the answer was it was Jim. In fact, at some point, it's going to look like you are working so hard to avoid answering that it's Jim that the jury's really like, why are they not saying it's this guy? Like, they're going to eventually get to wonder, like, why are you guys working so hard to not acknowledge that he was the decision maker? So that's just my 2 cents as to why they're all working so hard on the acknowledging if this was Jim or not.
I want to ask you about Heather Gibbs.
Oh, good. She's where I'm going next.
So when you have a sympathetic witness, and we know her backstory, we talked about it here, we all know it. You have to be delicate, right? You want to be respectful. What's the balance there when you're a defense attorney and you're trying to, you want to make your points, yeah. You want to poke at some of the things she says, but you also want to be respectful. How do you do that?
Well, in this instance, there's a different dynamic because she's not a party witness, right? So I think so far before Heather got on the stand, everybody was a party or a party employee. So she's also doesn't technically have a dog in the fight. So you would approach a non-party witness differently anyway. And I think that's just something that you would just be strategically thinking about to begin with. I think what you want to do is not underline the emotional aspect of it, because then you're just drawing attention. Like if you go hard on her or get really heavy into some of these things, all you're going to do is make her more sympathetic to the jury. I think she was incredibly impactful. She kept that through line of family business, which we know is also going to be to balance out the France family built this. Well, so did my family. And that stepping in to fight for what Coy wanted is obviously something that people can empathize with. Like I'm going to be a little personal here too. I lost my husband unexpectedly young in a relatively similar manner to Heather, where you don't wake up. And I think that she handled that explanation really well, especially for being the first time she's ever told the story publicly. I just thought it was really impressive. And then, of course, the bringing back up the gun to the head, which again came from, just a reminder to everybody else, that phrase is intentional because Scott Prime put it in an email about this is a gun to the head offer. And so that's why it keeps coming back up. I thought her explanation and storytelling about what that day was like, and the picture, you mentioned the picture painted of Joe Gibbs, super impactful, right? Again, if you got one of your big three, and one of the teams that you perceive as being willing to spend an outrageous amount of money to the point where it's not a good choice, is in this situation where they're begging you not to do this. I certainly hope that when Jim France made that comment about if I wake up and I have 20 charters, or I wake up if I have 30, he took into consider, like, I would certainly hope that he never thought about that. It was not a circumstance where he had actually thought about the fact that Joe Gibbs and Heather Gibbs had a circumstance where somebody they loved didn't wake up. Like, I would hope that would be a terrible analogy. And so I'm going to just give him the credit that he wasn't thinking about that when he said that. But that's a powerful thing to say. Like, even in the NASCAR version of events where we've been working to negotiate this for 2.5 years. Okay, if you've been working to negotiate it for 2.5 years, why does it have to be midnight on a Friday with typos? Right? Like that like if you really think this is a product of a long, thoughtful negotiation, when you get this impassioned call from Joe Gibbs, one of your big three, give it a week, push it off 3 days, let him talk to somebody, since it's going out on a Friday. So I thought that she was a really great witness. I also, Jordan, agree with you when she said she couldn't say. That's not because she is like bound to some sort of NDA, because when you're giving testimony, if a judge orders you to answer, you have to answer. So I think it was just she didn't know. Michael Jordan, I think that the jury, of course, wouldn't look like they were in awe of him. They've had a chance to look at him all week, but they also were being cool too, right? Like, you're not going to want to seem like you're like, oh, it's Michael Jordan. Though I'm going to give a shout out to Danielle Williams for how the attorney who did his initial introduction, because it's awkward to, like, you have somebody who's globally known, but you still have to be, where are you from? What do you do? You know, so I loved her. I hear you played basketball.
Of kind of just making, I don't say like she didn't make jokes about it, but she, had a little tongue in cheek a little bit.
Right. I think it's just one of those things, like, you have to do it, so you're going to do it. And I thought she handled it really well. I think that obviously Michael Jordan has spent 40 years talking to the public, and he's a savvy guy who can communicate well. And his media training, whatever he's had, and his experience, he's savvy, he's sharp on his feet, and he's charming. I also, again, the through line of family, telling the story about how his dad is how he got into NASCAR. I don't know if it came up at all, but Michael Jordan's father's death is a tragic story in and of itself too. His father was murdered, and but again, that whole through line of family and the idea of, we have Bob Jenkins talking about his 4 sons. You have Heather Gibbs talking about her 4 sons, and then their cousins, and Denny Hamlin talking about his dad, like this theme of family. I think it's really powerful and intentional to tell that story for the plaintiffs, because the story has always been you're trying to take apart this family-owned business. To just put up there like, we're families too, and this all comes back to family. I'm going to make the nerdy NASCAR fans out there happy by, if I were Buterman, I would not have mentioned Talladega and did you know that France built it? Because those of us who know about the 1969 Talladega race, how bad it was, and that all but 3 drivers were sat out of the National Series, probably would have said, pick any other story. I think that the theme of partnership is also an intentional effort to counter this negative picture of them coming into the sport and trying to wreck it. And again, circling back to giving credit to the good things NASCAR does, super important, right? Like pretending like they've never done a good thing ever is not going to get you anywhere. And when he answered the question about why they filed the suit, I was super vindicated as a person who was frantically texting Jeff on September 7th, like, oh my gosh, they're going to sue and here's why. But that message of his experience, his business experience, his ownership experience in the NBA, the financial ability to pay for this litigation, knowing about things like percentage references and what other businesses do, and that flat out, I wasn't afraid, right? And talking about how the other owners seemed beaten down. So I do feel like my reasoning for why they pursued this matched up, and it also gave him the opportunity to talk about his business experience. Why didn't they go into the whole, he kind of overthrew the Players Association? Not relevant. It really has no relevance. And it would have been one of those things that is like, it doesn't mean anything. It'd slow things down. So you're not going to get into that. Also, you don't know what he's going to say about that. He might have the most charming story ever about how it happened. And unless you really know it, you're not going to take that chance. So he made good use of his 60 minutes. The exchange with Buterman about the shoes, that's a power play tailing back to Buterman that he's paid attention, right? You think you've painted me as this absentee owner who's not around very much, but not only am I around, I've noticed what shoes you've worn to depositions, to mediation, to other hearings. And I'm letting you know that you're usually wearing sneakers and you're not. What's up with that? So, and also it's a funny thing that he can pull off, knowing that of any sneaker brand.
He does that a lot. MJ just did it at the Ryder Cup too. Like one of the players was trash talking and stuff, and he said to the player like, "Oh, what shoes are you wearing?" And they were Jordan. So it's his way of reminding people of like, "Hey, I'm wearing high shoes. I'm not wearing yours."
Right. And also, like, don't call me an absentee owner. Again, personally, this is where I'm going to have a fan moment. Knowing that Michael Jordan watches races on TV, every race on TV, I kind of felt a little bit of joy that he has, at some point in his life, complained about the commercials coming on and action on the track when the commercials were happening.
It's like us, right?
Yeah. Right. Like, he's had that fan experience of being mad at the production or direction of a race. And, as a fan, I'm like, well, at least he knows our pain a little bit.
All right, Chandler, one more question for you, because not to spoil it for everybody, but Jordan record for Good Morning America.
Good Morning America?
About 5 minutes. So we have to wrap this up fairly quickly.
Go for it.
Did you want to ask about the jury?
Go ahead.
Well, I'm going to throw in my one Jonathan Marshall comment.
Okay,
they're getting in the graphs and charts and documents through him so that the experts can talk about them more. But him also getting in that opportunity to answer questions straightforward, like who knows more, like Steve O'Donnell. Yes, in fact, you can answer a question in a straightforward way and it's not going to blow something up. So good for him for demonstrating that for the jury.
So I think arguably, today ended on a pretty good note for the plaintiffs. This was a pretty good week for them. When I was leaving the courthouse, in fact, before they walked out, they were all sort of laughing and in a very jubilant mood, it felt like. So, next week, they'll have a couple more days, and NASCAR takes over. How does this sit with the jury for the weekend, and how does NASCAR bounce back from here and give the jury time to keep an open mind and process their case?
Well, I think that what's unusual about this case is that NASCAR's already had 3 big witnesses. Well, has done a bunch of its own case already. So they're not only thinking about, normally you'd expect the first few days of a trial to go well for the plaintiffs because that's the plaintiff's time. NASCAR has also gotten to see how Steve O'Donnell did, how Scott Prime did. So they have some chance to figure out how are they going to incorporate these dual witnesses now that they know that they could be called super early or they could be called in the middle of the plaintiff's case. They have some time to think about strategically how they want to approach that and make some adjustments. I think that, somebody online asked me, would I feel better if I was, which team would I want to be on if I was on a lawyer, which one, who would make me feel best? What would make me feel best is to not be any of the lawyers who did anything that made Judge Bell mad. Just like, that's it, neutral. I just want to be the person who didn't do anything that made him mad. I think both sides are going to continue to think about how to best present their case, how to shorten things up, pick up the pace. I think that, you'd expect that at this point in the case that the teams have had an opportunity to get out some of their better witnesses and their better testimony. I think that that's happened. We've also gotten a preview of what NASCAR's case is going to be through Scott Prime and Steve O'Donnell. So I would certainly hope that over the weekend they decide to not keep circling back on these same points with Jonathan Marshall that aren't getting them anywhere. Like, if Biederman's really going to spend 45 more minutes with him on Monday, there are better and higher uses of his time. I'm also need to apologize to the fans of the internet who I might have accidentally caused to believe that Richard Childress was testifying today, because I saw that Ty Dillon and Mike Verlinder were there, and I just jumped at that. Must mean he's the afternoon witness. I am the squirrel that Ty Dillon ran over.
They were on a scouting trip to kind of get the lay of the land and see how everything.
So I was thinking when I first saw them, I thought, oh, he'll be Monday. And then when they got done early with Michael Jordan, I'm like, oh, maybe it is Richard Childress. And so this means that my airline miles and Marriott points are still not safe for me making an irresponsible decision to come to Charlotte next week. We'll see.
All right, Shannon. Well, thank you so much as always.
Appreciate you.
I have to.
Fun on good. Oh, we're out of the bubble. We're out of the bubble.
Yeah,
as I said,
we're out of the bubble because it's Good Morning America time for Jordan after he's already on CBS this morning, this week. So thank you, Shannon. So before we go, everybody, we obviously, you've seen in the comments, if you're live with us here, we got terrible news during this podcast that Michael Annette has passed away. Unbelievable at such a young age. To see that news, I obviously haven't seen anything more than the announcement, but obviously our thoughts are with his family and friends as we end this week here. It's been a busy week, and now it'll end on a sobering note, but really sad to see that. So everybody, I hope you stay safe and well this week. Obviously, unless there's a settlement, we will be back with you next Monday night. Thank you for all the support. Thanks for listening, and we will talk to you next time on The Teardown. See everybody.